geleneği olarak otelcilik sektöründe rakamlar acaba bize ne gösteriyor? Rakamlar bizi nereye doğru götürüyor? Biraz rakamlardan bahsedeceğiz. Türkiye odağında otel performansına bir bakış konulu analiz ve bize bu analizi aktaracak ve bizimle bu analizi paylaşacak olan isim CTR Kıdemli Direktörü Sayın Thomas Emanuel alkışlarla sahneye geliyor.
Günaydın, good morning. It's a great pleasure to be back here in Istanbul once more, and especially this year, of course, with the 100th anniversary of the Republic of Turkey. So it's a privilege to be with you today, and thank you all to the TTYD for their kind invitation. So I've got lots to get through in the next 20 minutes or so. This is what we'll talk about, though. We'll have a quick look at STR and the CoStar Group, our parent company, for those of you that aren't familiar. We'll look at what's happening across the globe, what's happening in Europe and the Middle East, before we look in depth at hotel performance here in Turkey, before moving on to the pipeline. And I'm going to finish with something a little bit different this year. But for those of you that aren't aware, STR, we are the market leaders in hotel performance data, data benchmarking, analytics, and marketplace insights. Now, why can we say this? Well, we've got 38 years of experience. We work with 79,000 hotels around the world, more than 10 million rooms, and 78% of all branded hotel rooms globally contribute data to us. And with that data, we can provide a whole wealth of cuts of information, as you can see here, many tens of thousands of cuts of data that we can provide the industry to keep them appraised of what's happening. But in 2019, we were acquired by the CoStar Group, who are the leaders in commercial real estate data. And you can see there some of their power numbers, a very big, successful company. And the combination of CoStar's technology and STR's data has allowed us to create the best-in-class benchmarking system in the world, candidly, which assists you in the whole life cycle of a hotel. And you can see there some of the key performance indicators that we will track. And that will help you, of course, improve your performance, your revenue management, help you make more money, measure your success, and you can control who has access to this. So I would encourage anybody, any operator, brand, or owner that is not working with STR, please scan the QR code, talk to me, talk to my colleague Jean later, reach out, let's all work together to provide greater data transparency for the hospitality industry here in Turkey. So let's move on now and have a look at the data, and we're going to start with a global overview. Now, this first chart shows you occupancy, the green bars, indexed on 2019, as well as demand. So that's the number of rooms sold. And if we look at occupancy, you can see we're nearly but not quite back to 2019 levels. And as you see me go through this presentation, we talk a lot about occupancy. In many cases, we're nearly but not quite there. But demand, the number of rooms sold. As a global industry, we are now selling more hotel rooms than we were in 2019. So we have recovered from that perspective. But don't forget, of course, during that time period as well, a lot of new supply came in. So that is why we're still seeing occupancy a little bit below the 2019 comparison. But of course, there are regional differences. You can see here the occupancy year to date and the percentage change from 2019. And again, most of those regions nearly but not quite back. We've got a couple of exceptions there, Central America and the Middle East, and I'll talk more about that region, of course, momentarily. Average rates, though. A lot has been said about average rates and just how quickly they came back after the pandemic. And you can see there, with the exception of China, which is, of course, a little bit later to open up, double-digit growth across the board. In Europe, 31% increase. So let's now look at Europe in a little bit more detail. Now this shows you monthly occupancy, which is the green bar, the blue bar being average rate, and then the purple bubble, RevPAR. Monthly percentage change year on year. Now what's happening? It's slowing down. It's slowing down. Now why is it slowing down? Because in Q1 of 2022, we still had Omicron raging across the world. So the comparable was different. We are now comparing ourselves as we move towards the present day to a more recovered industry. So those days of double-digit growth are behind us. We need to get used to those more traditional levels of single-digit increases. Day of week in Europe compared to 2019 shows the strength of the leisure recovery and how important that has been. Friday, Saturday, Sunday nights nearer 2019 levels, although corporate has started to return. But another demand driver that hasn't quite returned yet is groups, and we need to see this come back. As you can see, transient's been recovered for quite some time, but groups still 15 to 20% below 2019 levels. And if we look at the key gateways across Europe, occupancy year-to-date indexed on 19. Some are recovered there, Dublin, Edinburgh, Warsaw, Vilnius. Most in North and Western Europe, 90% plus recovered. The further east you go, a little bit softer in the recovery thus far. But what about rates? Well, you saw how much they'd increased, but again, it's been the leisure traveller that has seen the biggest increase in average rates in the last few years. So a very typical pattern there. But if we look at a city level, well, it's a sea of green, isn't it? Only Helsinki and Tallinn, due to the lack of Russian travellers now, slightly below 19 levels. And you've got 5 cities on that map there: Paris, Rome, Budapest, Kiev, and here in Istanbul, where we see more than 50% increase in average rates since 2019. But of course, Turkey sits on the crossroads of Europe and the Middle East. So I wanted to just touch on what's happening across the GCC as well. And there's a lot of numbers on this chart, but if you look at the percentage changes versus 19 and versus last year, it's all positive. GCC is doing very well. But I want you to pay special attention to the supply number here. Look at how much supply has increased since 2019 and even year on year. In most cases, that sort of supply growth would showcase a bit of pressure on occupancy, but it's not the case. This region is going from strength to strength. And that supply-demand equilibrium is really interesting across the GCC. We look at this chart. Since 2019, Dubai has seen 26% increase in supply. Al-Khabar, 22%. Riyadh, 20%. But all 3 of those cities have seen more than 30% uplift in demand. So occupancy is still growing. You see there as well, Doha, Qatar. That's all World Cup related, of course. 43% growth in supply. And as you get further down, yes, it's not as dramatic, but there's still a lot of supply coming in. But despite that, the equilibrium is pretty healthy. And it continues to do well. Year-on-year occupancy for the key cities across that region, except Doha, which is, of course, a World Cup hangover, we can actually see growth across the board with the biggest increases in secondary leisure markets, Salalah in Oman and Ras Al Khaimah in the Emirates. But rates across the GCC haven't grown quite as much as they have in Europe. We've still seen some healthy growth, particularly in the holy cities, Mecca, Medina, Riyadh, Abu Dhabi and Dubai, but some a little bit softer, and we're seeing that slow down as well. This is year on year. You can see a number of markets just below where they were. That, I think, is really the industry resetting itself a little bit, having had a very tumultuous few years, but we've still got some standout increases. Again, the holy cities really quite present there, of course, religious tourism returning. But let's now come to the main event, shall we? And have a look at what's happening here in Turkey. And we are currently working with 422 hotels. That's just under 70,000 keys. So we've got a good sample, but we want more. So we want more of you to work with us to improve the transparency of the industry here. But let's begin by looking at Turkey versus, again, Europe and the GCC. So it's not just geographically that this country straddles those regions. From an occupancy recovery standpoint, it's relatively speaking in the middle as well. A little bit more correlation with the GCC, with some Ramadan shifts, but ultimately fairly in line. But we have to look at the data as it's presented to us, and we can see it has softened a little bit in this calendar year. So I want to deep dive into that a little bit more. This is a long-term supply, demand, and RevPAR percentage change chart for Turkey. If we look at supply, fairly minimal. We saw a 3% growth in 21, 22, but we'd seen a bit of a deduction in 2020. So supply not really too much of an issue here. But look at demand. We all know what happened in 2020, of course. And it's already been discussed this morning. Look at the recovery. Look at what happened in 21. The rebound here was far better than most other countries. And that recovery continued very strongly into 2022. 2022 was a phenomenal year for the Turkish hotel industry. But look at 23. We've seen a softening in demand. Less rooms have been sold this year. And that has translated, unfortunately, into a slight occupancy decline versus 22. You can see, looking at our daily data, that it's not quite as high. Now, I would ask you, obviously, not to shoot the messenger. The data is as we find it from the hotels. But I've looked at this, and this is kind of my take on why. Why have we seen a slight softening of performance here? Now, you're obviously all in the market. I'm sure you could add to this and better this, but this is my thoughts. So, of course, inflation is high. Interest rates are high. The economy is not growing at the levels that it was, and that is, of course, going to impact performance. Exchange rates. The currency has been held. So we are seeing, and we'll see more in this presentation momentarily, rates for foreigners are a lot higher than they were. Elections. This year, next year, any kind of political uncertainty does stall things. It slows things down from a decision-making perspective. Of course, the tragic earthquake that we saw as well. Now, that didn't just impact hotels across southeastern Anatolia, it impacted the whole country as travel plans were put on hold. And really a victim of your own success in many ways. Many foreigners coming here and buying property. This article that we found, 1 in 4 properties in Antalya being bought by foreigners. So if they buy a property, they're not staying in hotels any longer. And then has been referenced as well this morning, the conflicts, what's happening in Israel and in Gaza. The proximity to that has seen a slowdown in bookings, unfortunately. And also, of course, Ukraine and Russia. Key source markets for the industry here, but now we're seeing less flights, more economic challenges in those feeder markets. So it really is a cocktail of challenges in many ways. But I don't want you to despair. Because if we look at the key summer season, June, July, and August across the country for the last 10 years, 2023 was still the 4th strongest year. It goes to show how good last year was, as well as 18 and 19, which, as Maribel from the WTTC mentioned earlier, were really the premium years for our industry. But as you can see, when we look back historically, it's certainly far from a bad news story. Average rates, though, well, just as you would expect, you can see there the green line for 2019. It goes up in 22 quite dramatically. For most of this year, it's been even higher. We've seen rate growth, but it has tailed off a little bit in the last couple of months. There's no denying that. But it's not just here in Turkey that we see that. In Europe, it's slowing, and in the GCC as well. I mentioned exchange rates. So because the currency has been held, you can see, compared to 2019, just how much rates have gone up for a number of key source markets, especially there, look at Russia, obviously devaluation of the ruble. But I know that there's a concerted effort here to change the perception of Turkey as a cheaper destination, more cost-effective destination, should we say. So I think actually, in the long term, these average rates will assist in that aim. But let's look at things overall. Versus 2019, every month, you've got their occupancy, okay, nearly but not quite back, we know that. Average rates, though, significantly above, so that all-important purple bubble, which represents RevPAR, significantly ahead of where it was in 2019. Let's now have a look at the markets, the different cities across the country, and I'm going to show you a series of maps. So I would ask for your attention because they look very similar, but the data is different on each slide. But let's start with actual occupancy year to date across the country. And it's no surprise to see here in Istanbul we have the strongest occupancy at 65%, of course, a plethora of demand drivers in this fine city. And then we've also got Adana, Izmir, north of 60%. Bodrum, of course, seasonal, so not surprising when you look at a year-to-date number, it's a bit softer, and Eskişehir as well, just 45% occupancy. But when we index on 2019, it looks rather like the European map. We've got some markets that are fully back there, Kayseri, Bodrum, most markets 85+% returned, and a couple lagging a little bit further behind. Average rates, the variance of average rates across the country. Bodrum, luxury, leisure, 591 euros average rate, astounding. And then Istanbul here, 147 euros, which when you compare internationally is actually very, very good, very respectable, the average rate here. Other markets, as you can see, more cost effective, shall we say, Kayseri, Eskişehir, south of 50 euro average rate. But when you index on 2019, it looks pretty good. Gaziantep, Adana more than doubled their average rate since before the pandemic, and everywhere else we see double-digit increases. So if we put that all together and have a look at RevPAR, RevPAR indexed on 2019 across the country has grown by double digits. Bodrum, Adana have more than doubled their RevPAR since before the pandemic. The one other number I want to point out there, the Turkish Riviera, 73% ahead of RevPAR before COVID. So let's have a quick look at the Turkish Riviera versus some of the other Mediterranean competing destinations. So I've taken the summer here, June, July, August. This is occupancy percentage change to 2019. So it's nearly but not quite back. Okay, we know that story. But as you can see, across the Med, it's pretty much the same. One exception there, the Red Sea resorts, but there were restrictions on flights due to security concerns in 2019. So not surprising to see that bucking the trend. But elsewhere, as you can see, the Turkish Riviera is in line. But if we look at average rates, well, again, we see just how strong rates have grown. It's the strongest on the map, more than 3 times what the neighboring Greek islands are achieving. So if you look at that from a rate perspective and an overall RevPAR perspective, again, the Riviera is doing relatively well. Now, it would be rude of me to come here, I think, and not have a few slides dedicated to this amazing host city, Istanbul. So these are our power numbers, and we can see there, we know occupancy is not quite back, rates still growing year on year. RevPAR, slightly down this year, as we know why, but overall versus 19, it looks good. But of course, this is a vast city. We can't really talk about it as just one number. So these are the 6 sub-markets that STR track data for in Istanbul. And if we look at occupancy, it's actually relatively similar across the city. It goes from 68% year-to-date in the historic peninsula down to 62% in Beşiktaş and the Bosphorus. So not much difference, but rates, vastly different. 332 euro average rate in Beşiktaş and the Bosphorus, just 92 euro average rate on the Asian side as well as the west part of the city. So vast city, vast difference in average rates. If we look at day of week, we don't see exactly the same pattern that we saw across Europe for an occupancy perspective. Sunday night's actually the strongest night in terms of recovery, that is. So that perhaps points to some bleisure. Bleisure travel, business leisure, come in, have a great day in the city, stay Sunday night, start work Monday morning. But rates, it's more of a typical pattern. You can see this is, again, indexed on 19. The leisure traveller is paying the most increase when compared to pre-COVID. And then my last slide here, but I think it's a really impactful and important slide. The Champions League final, Manchester City versus Inter Milan. What often happens during a mega event, we don't really see occupancy grow that much. Didn't happen here. But where we see the growth is rates. And you see the night of the final across Istanbul, 588 euros in average rate. Really, really substantial rates. So it's so important for Istanbul and every other city across this country to attract events as much as possible because they drive revenue. Now, let's move forward and have a quick look at the pipeline. Now, the question I've posed, where is it? And the answer is right here in Istanbul. So this is the active pipeline. We've got 9,500 keys in the pipeline across Istanbul, which is 51% of all of the active pipeline across Turkey. And if we look at who's developing, you can see Marriott have got 3,200 keys in the pipeline just here in Istanbul. Hilton, 1,900, Accor, 1,300. These are big global chains, and they aren't the only ones. But if they're confident and they want more flags in the ground, it's a real show of confidence in the future of the city. But it's important not to look at pipeline alone. We need to look at it in the perspective of existing supply as well, and how much existing supply will increase if all of those projects open. So you can see here maps from the CoStar platform. Each of those diamonds represents a project in the pipeline. So not a huge amount of new supply as a percentage of existing coming into the Riviera. But across Istanbul and the rest of the country, 14%, not a huge number as a percentage when you compare to many other countries. And I think as long as demand continues to grow and not all of that supply will obviously come in at the same time, not a particularly concerning number from an operating performance perspective. Now, before I conclude, I want to finish with something a little bit different. And it's taking data from STR and from CoStar, and it's from my home country. You might guess from the accent, I'm British. So it's from the UK, but it could be applied to Turkey as well. And this is an investment event for the tourism industry. So what I wanted to do was have a look at how attractive hotels are versus offices. And we're going to start by looking at occupancy. So this is UK data, remember, but we've got 2019 occupancy and 23 forecasted occupancy. Now, in the UK, occupancy is just about back. Now, I know it's a little bit softer here, but not that much. Offices, though, have seen a slight decrease in office occupancy since before the pandemic, okay? So you can see that index. But then you think about it. What about work from home? Remote working now. Realistically, have we really got 91% office occupancy? I don't think so. It's probably more like 50% office occupancy because so many people work remotely now. What about average rate or market rent? Now, as we know, rates have grown across the hotel industry quite considerably. And we're lucky, because we price on a nightly basis, we can adjust our rates for inflationary pressures and for cost pressures. Offices can't do that. They sign a long-term lease. So we know that rates have gone up far more significantly here in Turkey than in the UK. And they're pretty flat from an office perspective. So in that KPI, the gold medal goes to hotels. So if we put all of that together and look at RevPAR, or revenue per available square foot, which is a bit of a mouthful, we can see that the index for hotels is positive and it's stronger than the index for offices. But again, let's think about that actual office occupancy. Arguably, that's 0.54. So if there are any investors out there, I think the answer is probably quite clear, isn't it? Become a hotel owner. Now, to conclude, we are working in a new normal. The pandemic is behind us. The data that we see is fact. It's what's happening. It's real. But there are lots of opportunities ahead. It's been talked about already this morning. People still want to travel. They're putting travel and experience ahead of other expenditure. People still want to meet. They want to meet their clients. They want to be at conferences like that. In that respect, we work in a blessed industry. But there are risks. I went through that cocktail of challenges for Turkey, and there are multiple other risks, of course, associated with our industry. But overall, I feel very positive that want to travel, that want to experience will win the day, and we will continue to grow as an industry. And if you look at the, as I'm sure you will have, the Go Turkey website, and you look at the imagery, you look at the opportunities here, things are sustainable. They are the culture, the history, the food, the beaches, the nature, everything that is here is a recipe for success. And I do hope that I have the opportunity to come back to Istanbul and address you all in the future, hopefully with some very positive performance data. And with that, I'll say teşekkürler. Thank you all very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.